Hello, my name is Gemma, and today we're going to be talking about whether the beast that is Shogun by James Clavell is worth the read. So Shogun was written by Clavell in 1975 and is set in 17th century feudal Japan, and it's pretty big. It's like, let's have a little gander here. My copy is 1,123 pages. So I don't think there's anyone who would classify this as a small book. I myself am a fan of bigger books, but I know they're not for everybody. But should you still read this, even if you don't like big books? So one of the big things for me with reading a bigger book is that I go into it expecting a level of slowness, a level of build, which I personally get a lot out of. However, this book is not slow. This book throws you into the action from the very first chapter, and it's almost unputdownable throughout the entirety of its 1,123 pages. So in this, we're effectively following an English sailor, Blackthorn, who is on a ship which washes up ashore on Japan. And he has had a bit of a rough trot getting across the ocean. Lots of people have died. The crew is pretty ropey by this point, and they rock up in a village in Japan and experience some Japanese culture. And one thing I would say is that this book isn't 100% accurate to history, but it's fiction. And I found it really, really fascinating, the way that Clavell sort of explored the differences in culture between European and Japanese. So there are a lot of characters in this book to start with, but I personally didn't find it that difficult to understand. There is a lot of political complexity, so if that is your jam, you are missing out if you haven't read this book. And we see Blackthorn meet some very important samurais in Japan when they are on the cusp of civil war. So at the time that Blackthorn arrives, there is actually peace in Japan, which is pretty rare for this period of history. However, a significant event has happened, which means that the 5 sort of lords of Japan are very close to falling out, and when that happens, a war will be inevitable. And Blackthorn is sort of thrown into this situation. He doesn't speak Japanese. Also, there is a religious element here, because Portuguese Catholic priests do have a presence in Japan at this time, and Blackthorn rocks up as a Protestant under Queen Elizabeth, and there is a lot of animosity between the two Christian sects. And so when he turns up and there is a Portuguese Catholic priest in the village, he knows that he is potentially screwed because this priest does not like him. Also, Portugal and the Netherlands are at war at this point, and Blackthorn has been sailing on a Dutch ship. So there's a lot of problems for Blackthorn right from the bat. This is the situation that he's thrown into. None of this is spoilers. And as we sort of go through, we find that some Japanese people can also speak English. One of those is a key character in this book, Mariko. And Mariko is married to a very aggressive but important warlord in Japan, and she is sort of tasked with teaching Blackthorn to speak Japanese and being his translator effectively. And the character arc for Mariko throughout this book is awesome. She is such a badass female character, and some of you may be aware that there is a mini-series for this due to come out in this month, February 2024. And I really, really hope that they do Mariko's character well, because I was actually quite surprised to find a independent, free-thinking, kick-ass woman in a book that was written in 1975 by a man and set in 17th century Japan. So that was a lovely little Easter egg in there. We also have one of the key 5 warlords is a guy called Toranaga, and he is really the guy that Blackthorn finds himself allied to a greater or lesser degree. And he is also a fantastic character, a really fascinating character. We see the pressures of leadership and the pressures of providing for your people on his back. And so we have this Japanese culture of sort of samurai, honour, war, and we overlay that onto this very complex character, and he's fascinating to follow throughout the book. One of the other things that is really fabulous about this book is the way that it sort of gives you little tidbits about Japanese culture that maybe you hadn't thought about before. So one of my favourites was the Japanese approach to hygiene. This is something I hadn't really thought about, but back in Elizabethan England, people didn't wash that much. And it was a bit gross, but the Japanese had a completely different way of thinking about hygiene, and they were bathing regularly, daily. And so there was this clash of cultures between the two that was really interesting to explore, and interesting as well from a modern reader, to be like, wow, I really, really think the Japanese are right here, Blackthorn. You need to get your ass in the bath. And the way that you can see how over centuries, like different parts of cultures have just become the norm. There was also some mention of earthquakes in Japan, and the fact that a lot of the houses were built effectively from paper. And the reason for that is because when the earthquakes inevitably come, they're a lot easier to rebuild if they're made of paper than if they're made of brick. So just fascinating. Lots of detail on trade and why Japan was in the position it was with Portugal due to trade with China, and the sort of animosity between China and Japan is also touched on. And I just found that whole area of history really, really interesting. As I say, not all of it is completely accurate because it is a fictional account, but I still found it really fascinating to explore the differences between cultures and where they align and where they absolutely do not. So the book is named Shogun, and I didn't know what that was before I went in, but Shogun is effectively the military lead of Japan. They come almost above the emperor. They are very, very influential, and it's about these 5 warlords and whether they want to become shogun, and if a war would happen, would one of them become shogun? And so that's sort of like the overarching political situation. And the way that Clavell wrapped up his story at the end, I didn't actually think he'd be able to pull it off, but the way he wrapped it up at the end was really fantastic, because really these wars are centuries long, right? So how can Clavell write an in-person story that could last for decades? And the way he does it is really, really clever. So I would recommend because the ending does pull it off. I think that's one of the other concerns with a big book, that the first half might be great, the first 80% might be great, but then they flop the ending, right? But no, he did not flop the ending. It was fantastic. And so I guess in conclusion, what I'm saying is, yes, it is a big book, but if you like excellent characters, if you like political intrigue, there are some heads that get chopped off, so you do need to be open to violence because it's feudal Japan. There is a significant amount of violence in this book. But if you also love plotty page turners, this is a plotty page turner. And I got to the end, and though I did really love the way it wrapped up, I could have read another 600 pages of this book with no problem. I easily could have followed Blackthorn further into his experiences in Japan, and I think that's the sign of a really good book, right? I buddy read this with the fabulous Jack from Spread Book Joy. I recommend that you go and check her channel out. She gifted me this book, encouraged me to read it and then read it with me, and she was spot on the money. So if you're looking for more excellent recommendations, go and check Jack out. But I was very, very sad when this came to an end, even though, I mean, we read this quite slowly, really, over a 2-month period, 6-8 week period. And though I was kind of glad to get it off my my bedside table, I was so sad when it ended that I wasn't going to be following these characters anymore, that me and Jack weren't going to be talking about this story anymore, because it really is a really special book. So if you haven't read it, if you're thinking about reading it, if you've never heard of it but now I've got you interested, I really, really recommend. It's such a good book and absolutely worth the time investment. So that's my review of Shogun. I highly suggest you check it out. If you're looking for more fabulous books to read, I will leave my review for Demon Copperhead here for you to check out, and I will see you very soon with another one. Bye guys!